All right, so let's kick off module 17, which is our second bonus module. And this one is going to cover building a graphical user interface with Python using a tool or a module called TK-Inter, which is short for TK Interface. We're going to import that as a TK to start with. And then the first thing that you must create when you're creating a graphical user interface application is the window. So that's the main container for everything that TK has to present. Without a window, you can't really do a whole lot of anything. So we'll import TK interface as TK. We'll instantiate a window as TK.TK, and then and that takes no parameters. And then we'll use window.geometry to set the size of the window to 400 by 300. Oddly, this takes a string with an X in the middle of it between the two numbers. And this is in pixels. Most everything else that you see in TK is going to be in characters, which is a little bit weirder, and it's not the same width-wise as it is height-wise because characters are taller than they are wide. So in this space, it's pixel size. Everything inside the TK window is going to be in characters. So if I did a 400 by 300 text entry field, it would be much larger than this window actually is, and it would be very oddly shaped. So it would be just slightly wider than it is tall, even though these are flipped. A window main loop is included in every TK application, and window main loop will just run and run and run until you close the window or until you break the program. So everything, because we're running the main loop as a loop, everything that you do in TK has to be embedded within functions and in response to user events. So we'll talk about how we get into that in just a little bit. So inside the window of a TK application, we're going to place what are called widgets. Widgets are everything you see in an application, from buttons to labels, text entry fields, all of that stuff. So we're going to place widgets inside the window. And let's start with a very basic one. We will start by adding a label to this. See, if I run it right now, all I get is the empty window, which doesn't do a whole lot of good for us. But it does run as a separate application, and when I close it, then my application has stopped running. So let's add a label to it, and we'll call this label 1. And so in order to create a label in a TK application, I'm going to create a variable and assign it the value of TK.label. Every widget or every object in TK starts with a capital letter. Make sure you pay attention to that. If you instantiate it with lowercase, it's not going to understand what you're saying. And the label should at least have one attribute for it, the text attribute, which takes a string. In this case, I'll put hello world. Now, if I run this right now, it's not going to do anything. It's just going to give me an empty window again. And the reason for that is because I haven't actually put the label in the window. I've created the label. The label exists in the computer's memory. It exists in Python. I can make reference to it. I can change the values. I can do all kinds of things. But it doesn't exist on the window because I haven't placed it on the window. To place something on a window, you have to use the pack function. So I'm going to go label1.pack. And essentially what pack does is it places that object in the window, or that widget in the window. Now when I run it, you can see here that it says hello world up on top in that little label. Now, labels, like many of the things in TK, have many attributes, and you can sort of specify them and you can change them as if it was a dictionary object. So if I say label1 if I want to, I could do it like this. Label 1 text equals how are you? Okay, so what I've done here is I've just assigned this attribute of this object to this new value, and when I run it, you can see that it says how are you instead of hello world. So I overwrote that value. But you can also specify the attributes like this. If I want to do a background color that is black, that should be a string. You can use regular color names, but you can also use hex values. I'll change the foreground to white. I'll change the width. I just changed the foreground to white, so that's it. Yeah, it'll leave it black. It's not smart enough to figure it out on its own. I'm going to change the width to 30 and change the height to 10. Remember, these are in characters, so what you'll see here is it's just slightly wider. If I use 10 and 10, I want you to notice that the label is tall and skinny because characters are taller than they are wide. So this is 10 characters wide and 10 characters tall, but it's not square. If I want it to be square, I should do right around 2 to 1. That's pretty close to square. It's probably like 18 to 1 ratio of height to width. But there's my label there. So let's leave that label there, and let's create, I'm going to create another label. I'm just going to use the second one. I'm going to leave it a little bit more generic. Label 2 equals tk.label. Text equals enter your name. And I'm going to create an entry field, a text entry field. This is a single line by default. tk.entry. And I'll just specify the width on this one. Width equals 19. That should be equals. There we go. And now I'm going to pack both of those. So I'm going to say label2 dot pack and entry dot pack. And what pack will do is it's a shortcut. You can specify a more precise way of positioning things within the window using coordinates and things like that. But what pack does is it just tries to make things look neat and orderly. It'll center things for you and just do that kind of thing to try and be helpful. So there I have that. Now let's throw a button on here. Button equals TK button. And text equals click me. And if I want to, I can throw the pack right into that same line of code. I can stack functions just like I did before. So tk.button.pack, and it automatically will appear on the screen. Now you can see I've got a full application here that's got a text entry box, a button. Of course, it doesn't do anything. So before I get into doing anything, I want to talk about one more container type that is important, and that is called a frame. So I'm going to create, somebody's making lasagna down the hall. I'm going to create a couple of frames. Frame 1 equals tk.frame, and frame 2 equals tk.frame. And what frames do is they act like containers. They're basically containers inside the window. So the window is a big container and it's got widgets in it. If I want to organize my widgets a little bit easier, I can put widgets in frames. I can also use frames for things like changing the cosmetics of the layout and things like that. In this case, I'm going to use the frames to group some of my controls together. And the way you put a control or a widget inside a frame is by using the master attribute. So inside label 1, I'm going to say master is frame 1. And then in these others, I'm going to say master is frame 2. So in frame 1, I have just the first label. And then in frame 2, I've got another label, the text entry box, and the button. Now, while I have all of these packed, now that I put them inside frames, you'll notice that if I run this, what did I do here? Oh, you know what? Those aren't supposed to be strings. That's why. I don't know what I'm thinking here. Let me get rid of those. Silly me. Now let's run it. And what you'll notice is now all my controls are gone. The reason is when I pack those widgets, they go into the frames. But I haven't packed the frames into the window yet. So as soon as I pack those frames back into the window, then what's going to happen is everything will appear appropriately on this. So let's call those frame1.pack. And frame2.pack. So then when I run things, everything appears the way it should. But now, here's the interesting thing, is if I wanted to switch the positions and put that label on the bottom, or put the controls ahead of that label, all I have to do is switch the pack order, because we pack top to bottom. And now everything is up above that was down below, and vice versa. So I can use frames to change interfaces really quick, to group controls, to do things to multiple controls at a time. I can also use, if I want, I can take a frame and change the color, like the background color. So I can put a background color inside a frame. Looks kind of ugly. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. I can also put a border around a frame. Border width equals 2. And what is that? Relief equals raised. Let's make that a little bit more extreme so it's more obvious. Okay, so I can take and I can add those cheesy three-dimensional effects that you used to see in early versions of Windows and things like that. Or if I wanted to, I could do a solid border. I could do 2 and solid. And put a box around my frame that's visual. But most of the time, or a lot of the time, frames are just left invisible and used for grouping things. So I'll leave it that way for now. Now the last thing I need to do is add some functionality to this program. So what I want it to do is I want to type my name into the box, and then I want to click the button and I want to have it tell me hello in this label here. So there's really just a couple lines of code that we need to do, but we need to put it inside a function, and I'll show you why in just a moment. Also, if you're using TK with functions, you want to define all your functions up near the top of your code before you start breaking out the windows and stuff. So update text is what I will call my function. And I don't need any parameters here. So I want to, first, I need to get whatever's in the entry box that somebody typed. So I'm going to say str text equals entry.get, just like that. This basically does the same thing that we did all semester with input. So it takes whatever's in that entry box, whatever's in that text box, and it assigns it to that variable. It's always going to be a string, just like input. But just to be safe, I want to make sure it's explicitly converted to a string. And then what we're going to do is we're going to change the text for this label, which we already know we can do using the syntax label1 and text as a key, like a dictionary object, equals str text, and that's it. The last thing I have to do is tell the button that it's going to activate this function. Now, normally we would type something along the lines of the name of the function with two parentheses, but in this case, we're not going to do that, and I'll tell you why in just a second. But I'm going to say command equals update text. Okay, and even PyCharm wants to put the parentheses here. I can tell you this though, if I put the parentheses here, then when that button gets created, it will call update text. And I don't want it to call that until I click the button based on the command here. So if I just delete the parentheses, then it's gonna attach that function to the button. So now when I run that program, if I enter my name and click the button, it says Bill. I can even do things like, if I go back here to my function, have it do a string operation where it adds those together. Okay, I can also do things like change the label color, label 1 BG to red. Okay, so when I click the button, it changes the label color. Okay, and the background and foreground, by the way, can be applied to labels, buttons, text fields, just about anything. So there are a ton of different widgets. I'm not going to go through all of them today. I will show you a few more on Monday. And on Monday, I'm also going to get into a little bit of how to bring in images using the Pillow library and some of the other stuff that you want to do with a more advanced application. Also, it does bear mentioning that the reading for this module is very useful, and I'll show you specifically what I'm talking about. There's a link here that says TK Enter Widgets. This is going to go into tons of detail about all of the different kinds of widgets: frame, label, button, checkboxes, radio button, text entry, combo box or drop-down menus. And then if you click more widgets here, it's even got more advanced widgets. So list box, scroll bars, bigger text boxes for larger pieces of text. We've got a sliding scale, what's called a spin box. and progress bars. So lots and lots of different options. We won't go into each of those, but that's all there. Also, on the sample code, please pay close attention. There's sample code for Python, TK, Ruby, and Perl. So you want to, if you're using the sample code to understand what's going on here, make sure you're using the Python version of it, because this is a multi-platform site. Because TK is a multi-platform library. So you want to pay attention to that. And I think that's it for right now. For today's practice, or for what I'd like you to try out, is try creating a window, play around with the code a little bit, do some styling, and then maybe try to do something simple like a random number generator where it puts a random number in a label, or just integrate some kind of functional code with the application in some way and see what you can do. And then on Monday, we'll come back and close the loop with the second half of this module. And then following that, we just have 2 lectures left, which will both be on Pygame. So that's kind of the map for the rest of the class. If you have any questions, let me know, but that's about it.